last time, obviously I sat around, you saw me fumbling around and I didn't know we was live. So we made sure we knew we was live this time. So glad you could join again. Well, today I was put together something we want to talk about FFIEC, cat tool sunsetting. It was like, okay, how am I going to have this conversation? And I happened to be at an event and there's this lady come up. She's the main event speaker and come in this. And so she spoke and all this. And we was having questions and answers afterwards. And I asked her, so what's your thoughts on FFIEC sunsetting? And her eyes got really big going, I can't believe someone asked me that question here. So obviously I had to see if she could get on with us. So Charity, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks, Wayne, and thanks everybody for joining. Absolutely. That was a great event and so nice to meet you and so nice to be here today. So I spent 18 years, so nearly 2 decades in the financial services industry and really got my start in business continuity. And I earned those stripes with incident management and response and disaster recovery and all of the data centers that I've toured and business continuity plans that I've written. But it really paved the way for what I really love, which is governance. I'm a governance gal. GRC is really where I landed at my last position with the bank, and really got to build that program out, which was such an honor, but it was so much fun too. To really have a hand in not only business continuity incident management, that's a whole beast in itself, but really getting to understand the different frameworks. I spent a lot of time. I'll self-proclaim my nerdiness. I spent a lot of time reading the FFIEC handbooks on governance, business continuity, IT management, and really was able to stand up a program that I was proud of. So certainly when I had my fill in financial services, and I'll just say this for anybody that's in banking, I think it was 9 mergers in 18 years. And so, yeah, those can be brutal. And for some reason, I always ended up having to manage the crisis management piece of it, right during the mergers. So I spent a lot of times in data centers with no windows for days on end. But so really looking to what was next for my career and getting the call from CIS, being a globally recognized cybersecurity framework, I was like, yes, please sign me up. This is wonderful. I've led the charge for so many years in telling our boards and our IT folks on why you should follow a framework, and then getting to actually write and influence one was just a dream come true. So I've been at CIS for about 2 years. And so I'm responsible for, I'm the director of critical security controls. So I'm responsible for the control framework itself and all of the ecosystem that really supports that. So I hope we can get into that a little bit later on what that really means within that ecosystem. But yeah, it's great to be here and excited to talk about the cat sunset.
Now everybody can understand why. Anybody that knows me talking about compliance and dealing frameworks, they're like, why do you have so much fun with this? Process, procedure, all that. I just love it, right? It's my ability. You look in the back, if you're on a nuclear fast act submarine, you better follow process procedure because it can be deadly. So when we sitting with you and talking about this, it's like, okay, this will be fun. It's coming in. Now, some people will probably call us crazy, but hey,
it
takes all kinds, right?
They might be right, but
yeah, well, yeah, maybe that's debatable. So in talking about this, and what I do and my company do, we help a lot of banks and financial institutions, and actually outside there and other critical infrastructures work with controls and trying to make sure compliance is in place and how that ties back to cybersecurity and all this. And when it was announced that FFIEC was going to sunset the CAT tool, I had several of my banking folks come and say, wait a minute, that's our baseline tool. This is what we use to guide ourselves on this. What are we going to do now? Well, it's not really a big issue because there's so many tools out there that are using these frameworks and doing this, and you can export a spreadsheet, which that's what the baseline is. It's the baseline questionnaire that sets your baseline of where you're at within that journey. And it's not destination, that journey of what you're doing in compliance. So it's not really that bad. But one of the things I really wanted to talk about, it was, I believe one of the reasons, my reason that it's being sunsetted is ever since NIST 2.0 released and the updated in CIS, aligning governance to itself and separated out of it being buried into everything, that really set the stage of, okay, we don't need to do this anymore because now it's really defined. Is that the same perspectives as you're getting from your role there at CIS?
Yeah, absolutely. And even in their announcement, right, with the
Yeah.
sunsetting of the tool, it was like, hey guys, we there's so many other things that we recognize
Mhm.
as acceptable standards as well, that we don't have to keep up with this tool and continue to update
Right.
it. And not that frameworks update all that often, thank goodness, right? That causes a lot of churn, but it just wasn't necessary anymore. And you're exactly right. I think the CSF, NIST Cybersecurity Framework 1.0, I believe was 2014. So I mean, it's
Yeah,
10, 11 years before they released
exactly.
another one. And what I really liked about whenever we remain in proactive coexistence with
Right.
our NIST buddies. I actually just had lunch with them in DC a couple of weeks ago, and so when they aligned to governance and really pulled those functions out, we did the same, right? The
Right.
controls have always been built with governance baked in,
Yep.
like you said, kind of buried within
Yep.
the controls and safeguards. So it was really such a fun project to take on, and it was kind of easy, if I'm allowed to say that, right? Because we already have aligned to governance. We just pulled those security functions out, so that way when you take a look at the controls or CSF or whatever framework you're using, you can go ahead and pull those functions out. That helps with auditors, with regulators, about what does your governance of enterprise IT or your governance of cybersecurity look like, and you can easily pull those out. But yeah, I would say exactly right. It's not the end of the world. It's just a
Right.
different day.
Well, it was always that was probably the most frustrating thing for me about the frameworks was when you get in there, it almost felt like a cart before the horse, as I'd say, right? Because governance, like you said, it was always there, but you'd go answer a technical control, and then the governance question was after that. But wait a minute, shouldn't I have done the governance before that to set the stage for this? Absolutely. And that was always the confusion. I think that's the reason why FFIEC and others did their own crosswalks. And a crosswalk is where I'm taking two things and merging them together so they could put it in an order of precedence that made sense. But now that we have that, has it, like you said, I think you said it very well, is we didn't change anything. We didn't create new governance. We just ordered it the right way now.
Right.
I think
Exactly.
that's what people understand.
When 8.1 was released, of course, we
Yeah.
have multiple partners, whether they're consultants or assessors or even GRC tools, right,
Mhm.
that utilize our controls. It was, oh goodness, Charity, you guys are releasing an 8.1. What does this mean? What kind of churn? And I was like, actually, it's not any. It's just clarity of
Yeah.
exactly where those governance functions are. We didn't add any new controls. The
Nope.
controls are not now governance focused, right? It's exactly the same thing. It's just easier to see.
It was funny how much panic there was around that, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Because, oh, go in and I got to relearn something and oh, they got to change everything I'm doing. No, not really going into it. So when we're looking at this and from a CIS perspective, and one of the things I love about the CIS set of controls, um, I've done tons of NIST, and you did tons of NIST because banking has always been pretty much banks. But of course, NIST and CIS are very pretty much aligned. You will have a little variances every once in a while, but I think where most people look at CIS, and especially from the IT perspective, is the simplicity of how the set of controls have been defined and how they're and more to how they're worded to me than some of the other controls that are a little bit sometimes can be a little vague to me.
exactly, exactly right. And like you said, the FFIEC handbooks have always pointed towards either NIST or COBIT. COBIT is my other
Yep.
love.
Yep.
I love COBIT. But yeah, it's the simplicity of it with CIS. So coming on board, of course, I knew about CIS control framework absolutely,
Yep.
and knew about the secure configurations, which are the CIS benchmarks. But when you really do a one-to-one comparison, not that anybody aside from us, would want to do that. When you do a one-to-one comparison, it really is in the language of how it's worded. There's one ask per safeguard. That is huge. It's huge for auditors. It's huge for implementers, practitioners, to be able to adhere to a framework that is that precise and prescriptive. So I really think that that's something that sets us apart. Again, NIST, CSF, any of their other frameworks are wonderful. I mean, and really can be looked at as the encyclopedia,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
of controls. But CIS really being excellent at providing that prescriptive guidance and kind of hand holding. It can not only be easier to implement than some of the others that you'd have to interpret, right? So we
Mhm.
try to take the subjectivity out of it,
Right.
but also it can be an on ramp to other frameworks. If you
Exactly.
need to be compliant with CSF, or say you're a government contractor and you have to implement CMMC,
See.
right? The
Mhm.
controls, the CIS critical security controls can be an on ramp to that, which I really find to be very, very beneficial.
Well, that's one of the things that what we've always done is in our the GRC tool that we use. And a lot of them are coming this way, but we've always done it where we always layer CIS and NIST at the very beginning. I can add them other, but because of the nature of that is our GRC is the same evidence can be applied to multiple controls across multiple. Now, some of the older tools you had to do them separately, but we're able to do it. And the reason why we always apply the two, always, is because there's things that every business requires, and that is the cybersecurity insurance, and all the cybersecurity insurance controls are based off CIS controls. So we always layer both of them together because it gives us an advantage to cover even a wider breadth, even from a standpoint of they might not need it now, but I know they will. And why not be ahead of the game? And it does. I'm not having to do dual work because my GRC helps me with that. But we believe that's a smart way to go. Plus, I'm a big proponent of the CIS benchmarks. Big proponent of the CIS benchmarks. Um,
Here.
Even if there's some where you say, okay, that's an acceptable risk, I'm doing a waiver because an application can't work with that, benchmark in place, which is totally acceptable from a framework standpoint, an auditor standpoint, as long as you put that evidence in there. So my next question coming in there with FFIEC, with its sunsetting coming like this, and we got folks out there, we already say, hey, it's not a big deal. We got where it's falling. But if you was giving guidance about from looking at it, it's like, hey, look at your tools and is it doing these things? What are some of the, two or three things they should look at doing and make sure they can make that transition. So when their audit time comes up, they're ready for it and being able to, if an auditor comes in, the old school auditors coming in, they're used to the baseline tool and they say, hey, where's your baseline? How you present. I know how we're doing it, but how would you recommend someone being ready for that, how they're presenting that, and then saying, okay, this is equivalent to what they're used to seeing before? What would you guide people to do there?
Yeah, absolutely. And back in my banking days, of course we used the CAP, but we also used third party,
Right.
non-biased assessments. We also used GRC tools. So it was, like you said, definitely different layers, right? And so really, what I would advise, first and foremost always is selecting a framework. Right. I am biased, so of course
Oh,
I would recommend the CIS Critical Security Controls Framework. FFIEC actually does point to that as an acceptable tool
yes, it
in
does.
their release and their sunset notes. So knowing your framework, first and foremost, because really I think that I like a holistic view of things, and I feel like auditors really like transparency. I've had
Yes.
a lot of conversations with auditors. I've kind of been seen as a first level of defense auditor myself, and I've had a lot of conversations with regulators. And as you stated before, if you know your framework and you know what your level of maturity that is accepted by the company is, right? That's a key second point. Being transparent with whomever you are being assessed by. Is really key. You're able to provide that evidence if you know where you're going, right? There can
Mhm.
sometimes be a fog of more, which we talk about at CIS a lot. There's just so many frameworks and so many regulations. Where do I go? How do I begin? Where's my
Mhm.
journey? And one thing I really love about the CIS critical security controls is that utilizing the implementation groups there really builds in that maturity for you. Start with implementation group one, no matter your size.
Yep.
it's got your roadmap and your your security maturity built into that for you. So knowing your framework, knowing how you're going to provide the evidence, and then having a plan. One other thing that I've learned with dealing with auditors and regulators is if you're transparent about it, like, yes, we understand that this is a self-identified risk that we have. We have a risk registry. This is what's acceptable to the company, and providing that evidence or even a plan for remediation, which we haven't even gotten into.
Right.
So really, I think that those would be the three key things.
Yeah. The in, the point that you made about FFIEC actually calling out the NIST 2.0 and the CIS controls, either one would meet what was going to the CAT, which is very interesting because I think that throws some folks, because most
Yeah.
people have been so entrenched with the NIST because that's what it was based off of, and that's what most people always did. Now the CIS say, okay, well, you can choose. Now they're going, okay, all right. They tend to going to go the NIST because they know the auditors, that's what they've been used to. And the least you shake up an auditor, the better. Right?
Right.
Okay, I got something new. Oh, that means they're going to ask a bunch of questions versus, okay, this is in line with what they're used to doing. That I might eliminate some of the questions that gets asked, right? That's probably out of all the discussions I've had on this topic, that's probably the biggest fear, I would say, folks at banks and other places are saying that's what makes us nervous about, okay, which one do I choose?
Right. And it's been a really awesome journey with that. Of course, even working at CIS last year, whenever they put the announcement out, I was like, oh wow, that's a big deal. Like, as
Yeah,
a
it's
former
a big deal.
banker, I'm like, that's a big deal. Cool.
Yeah,
And seeing that they specifically called out CIS as an acceptable framework, I had the exact thought. I was like, well, my gosh, we always followed NIST because it was specifically called out in the FFIEC handbook.
right.
So that's what we want to do. But I think that this is a great time to really evaluate what makes the most sense for your business, for your bank, for your cybersecurity program. And it's been really cool because actually the Fed and FFIEC, FSISAC, all of those folks have reached out to me and my team, right, to
Mhm.
come on and speak about it. So I mean, I think that not only do they point to it in a press release or a document, right, but they've asked me to come and join their communities and have the conversation. What does it mean to choose CIS versus NIST, or also with NIST, and kind of what does that mean? So it's been incredible to have these. I think I'm at the fifth time that I've appeared on some sort of webinar with Ask the Fed or FFIEC. So it's been great.
So that's coming in here from the auditor's perspective, and the auditors that are out there, they're now seeing this, and now they're looking at, because there's two sides of the story, right? There's what the auditee is having to prep, but then there's the auditors are looking at what they've got to do, because that's something that's been set and that's what they've been doing. It was going on. What are you seeing from that side? Are you as auditors coming to you and taking a look and getting input from you guys about, okay, now this option we may be running it, we got to be prepped for this? Or what are you seeing from that side of the house?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the earliest conversations that I had with our friends at the FFIEC was exactly that. Like, this is going to be a shift in
Mm-hmm.
in audit examination processes, right?
Right.
Because they are used to the CAT. So
Yep.
this is a shakeup on their side as well. And so really I've gone into it with, trying to address the fear of that,
Yeah.
and how that would look. And what I'm getting from them is, wow, it's already into implementation groups, so that is the maturity. You're already, there's only 56 controls in IG1. That's so few, So
I
I
hear
think
that a
that it's
lot.
favorable, that they're able to see this, because evidence for every single control or safeguard, or however it's organized, can be a daunting, overwhelming audit. So I mean, we're getting favorable feedback from them, like, oh, okay, well, if a financial institution is saying that they're aligned with the CIS critical security controls based off of IG1, then there's only 56 things instead of 300 to look at. So it's been really positive.
Well, another thing that's where some of the clarity for me comes into play is when people ask me the difference, and I go, well, they'll ask me, why does the CIS controls have less controls than what NIST has, but they cover the same thing? And I want the easiest answer I can give them is, okay, when you've gone through your NIST questionnaire, how many times did you feel that you've already answered that question?
Yes. Yes.
And that's all it boils down to, really. But then it's an association of information, which is one of the things that we did was, one of the tool that we use is when we go in and we use our AI engine that is against NIST and other is, okay, when I answer that question, I give the evidence. How many times is that? Oh, go ahead and update it because it's the same information. Go update. So I think a lot of people think, well, NIST is covering more information, and actually it's not. It's covering the same. It's just, to me, CIS is cleaner from a standpoint of it deduplicated a lot of redundant questions that I didn't need to do, but I still have associated to the different sections, the different modules I got to do. Change management versus security. Yes, they have that relationship control, but I don't have to ask that question a second time. I can reference back to that. So I think that's the biggest thing that I hear people talk about, and I think that's where it's cleaner there. So my next question for you is, okay, coming from that side, stuff like that, and you've had people, there's people who's been so used to the cat and all this, and let's say they say, you know what, because I looked at CIS, I liked how it's grouped, I liked the cleanliness of it, the simplicity of it, how layman's terms I like to use is when it comes to actually, okay, when I read the question, it makes sense to me business wise. How would I make that transition and then make the transition easy? Just start using the set of controls and do the same ways you've been doing with NIST. That's the easy part. But when that auditor comes in and sits down, how would you approach them at the very intro level of the initial meeting, getting prepped for the audit they're going to do? What would your recommendation be to that bank or that entity to have that conversation with the auditor to set the stage?
Yeah, I mean, you can that can be in several many different ways. One of the easiest is, we have a cybersecurity, like a self-assessment tool. It's free to
Mm-hmm.
end users, and it is just it's truly just, you download it. It's automated, and you fill it out and it gives you your implementation. So having that evidence from the jump, right? Having that very transparent conversation, right? Per the CAT sunset, we have decided to align with CIS critical security controls. We have this self-assessment tool, and then we have our, third parties that audit us as well, or you can have those types of conversations with the results of those meetings, and then just really being able to show that it maps and that crosswalk is there. I'm doing my part for everybody that's going to have these conversations on the sidelines with the regulators and the auditors, but also being able to show that demonstration of compliance, right? Like we are aligned to the FFIEC CAT already. There is a crosswalk, a mapping that you can get from our website that shows that we're mapped to NIST, we're mapped to ISO, et cetera. Enter all of your frameworks, and being able to show that evidence and show that crosswalk. So it's really just going to be a conversation, right? A conversation piece with being very transparent about the framework that you're aligning to, and then having those crosswalk conversations as well, and being able to show that to them.
Do you think that the auditing side of the companies they actually got the same decision to make as the client side is which framework they're going to go with? I think auditors have it a little bit tougher because they got to do both. They got to be able to be familiar with both because depending on where they walk into, they got to be prepped either way.
Right. Yeah. When the sunset was announced, I had like my first two thoughts were, oh, that's probably good news for some bankers that didn't really like it because it's a manual spreadsheet, right? And it's a task to manage. But then my second thought was, oh goodness, the regulators and the auditors are really going to have to, understand even more now, right?
Yeah,
It's not just a
exactly.
one-to-one questionnaire, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So, well, from that aspect, the where do you see over the next, I'd say, 12 to 18 months, when you're looking at this, when people make this decision, it really, once you make the decision, the level of work of what you're doing is pretty much the same. If you, depending on who's helping you, what you need to do. If you don't know and you're trying to at least get started, I think talk a little bit more about y'all's little free tool that can help someone get started. And even if maybe they're trying to make a decision, I think this is a good idea. Is, let's say they're sitting there and they really don't know which way they're going to go. I think doing that tool and running it could help them understand how they can make that change.
Right. Absolutely. And so, if you're not familiar, anybody that's not familiar with CIS, we're a global nonprofit, right?
Yep.
So our mission is to serve the cyber underserved. So you hear me talk about these at no cost or free tools, and that really is the nature of our business. We want to make it as easy as possible, eliminate the fog of more, make this as less stressful as can be, and so like you said, one of the tools that we have, the self-assessment tool, really does allow you to see a baseline of where you are and where you're going. You can customize it based upon which implementation group that you're going to go with, and then you can build it over time, which I think is an excellent roadmap that's already laid out for you. So making the decision, and a lot of times with some folks, they're doing more than they realize. It's just not formalized. So that's where
Right.
that
Yeah.
governance piece
Exactly.
comes in,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we really do, by design, and I say we, me and the wonderful controls cybersecurity engineers that work on my team. We absolutely pick apart the safeguards all the time. Is this measurable? Is
Yeah.
the intent clear? Do we have examples? Is this duplicated somewhere else? We really do agonize, if I'm able to say that, over it, to make it one ask per safeguard and make it as easy as possible to implement as well as measure. So really, that self-assessment tool that I'm speaking of, and it's CSAT. If you go to the CIS website, it's CSAT, controls self-assessment tool. You're able to really see where you sit with that. You're also able to export that data, identify risks based upon what your implementation is, provide a roadmap, whether that's for your CISO or your board. Right, you're even able to export it in a dashboard format for board level slide decks, right? To have those conversations to justify your decision to go with CIS and really provide, what that's going to look like over the next, 12, 18, 2 years, right?
So another way I want to look at this is, we've been talking about the banks, the client side of it. We've been talking about the auditors, but we both have been mentioned several times the third parties that help these, because there's a lot of these folks, they need help because there's a lot of resource and a lot of man hours that goes into doing compliance and staying ready all the time. So there's GRC tools like we've been talking about, but there's also the third parties that help maintain that readiness and help them doing that, being their VCSO, being their virtual compliance officer, stuff like that. What do you say to those folks that's providing those services that's been, dealing with FFIEC, been doing the NIST straight, and they're looking at, okay, well, if they're tying in their services, if they want to look at the CIS level of it, what should they do to engage with CIS and be able to get that education and being looking at to really be able to handle what needs to be done from that conversion going from NIST if they're going to convert over, like one of their customers wants to go to CIS. What would you say to those folks, and what do you guys provide to those type of folks?
Yeah, absolutely. We have so many, we work with so many MSPs and auditors and consulting firms and GRC tools, right? Because by design, the controls are, we provide the content, we provide the research, the prioritization, and the framework best practice recommendations itself. But we want it to be used, right,
Right.
by
Exactly.
others, right?
That's the
We
purpose,
want
right?
we want the GRC tool vendors to use our stuff, right? Absolutely. We promote that. We have great relationships with, big GRC tool vendors, and then all the way to Google and Amazon, right? They use our stuff too, especially the benchmarks. So really, being able to work with them and provide an accreditation. So this is something that we started last year. It was actually 2 years ago. It really got off the ground about a year ago, but it's the CIS Controls Accreditation Program. So we're very, very plugged into our communities. We've had consultants and auditors and GRC tool vendors alike say, hey, you know, how can we co-promote? Like, we want you to reference us when people, come to us, like say, hey, can you recommend a consulting firm or, this third party vendor, et cetera. And so we have an accreditation program. So that's what your stamp of approval is from CIS, is this accreditation program. It is evaluated by a third party, non-biased partner, which is Crest. They're global as well, since we have a global presence. And it's really just putting that stamp of approval on. They know what they're assessing, they've been trained, and they're able to provide that on our behalf, right? It does come with being a CIS Secure Suite member, to where we would be able to co-promote. And but it's a newish program and doesn't have a whole lot of visibility at this point. So I'm glad that you asked me that. But yeah, it's
Well, from our perspective, which we're going to be putting ourselves through the same thing, doing that because we were just like others, we were so ingrained. We had been doing the cybersecurity trust mark with CompTIA, or should I say
yeah,
GTIA, doing that. But it's one of the things where you come into it because we were so ingrained in NIST, we never really, did much with the CIS outside of the cybersecurity insight. So we just lay those controls over there. But with this shift now and what we do, that's the reason why we're going to go through the journey of that certification as well. But I think that's, if you look out there and what's going on, even if you do have, I've got CISSPs, certifications, we do this, we got reference accounts of what we're doing and we're doing this stuff right. But aligning this, what would you say is the biggest value to someone like us getting accreditation with CIS? I mean, what does, from your view, and I think promoting it is a big thing. It's a two-headed promotion. Not only just you guys promote it, but the ones that's getting accreditation needs to understand how to promote that and why, and being consistent with that. Where do you see that going, and why would you recommend that?
yeah. I mean, I obviously the promotion we can co-promote, and we have a big presence. So
Right.
we have a wonderful reputation that I'm just so proud to stand on. But having that stamp of approval or head nod from CIS, from the framework owner, saying yes, Wayne and his company have gone through the accreditation program, they are legit, they know what they're talking about, and they, on our behalf, can assess your organization based upon what we say is best practice, and they know what they're doing.
Okay. So I'm going to change gears a little bit. This last half of what we're going to talk about is, you know, I get into a lot of conversations out there, and as I'm talking to the customer, I'm listening, and I'm also, and I'm realizing that they use cybersecurity, risk management, compliance, all in the same term. They define it all. To them, it's all the same thing, and it's so not. Um, So, I have a slide that I do when I'm having a conversation with folks, and just to set the stage, that I define cybersecurity, here's what it is, versus compliance, and here's what that is. Okay. And to set stages, and I use the words tactical and strategy associating to those because it's truly is this over here, the cybersecurity side of it, the risk management of it, that is tactical work that you're going off doing, put it in there and determining where your risk sets based on doing that tactical work versus compliance. We talk GRC tools on this is coming in. And now we're going to take that information, put that in, how it aligns to those controls, and the other layers on top of it, policies, procedures, all these other. Are you doing your training, employee management, vendor side of it, and vendor management side of it? From your perspective and how you guys approach it, when someone asks you what's the difference between risk management and compliance, how do you approach that?
Yeah, and I think that there's definitely an additional layer on top of that, as well as what's your defense posture, right? That's a whole
That's
other.
it. I didn't want to go that deep yet, but we'll get there because that's another whole way of looking at it.
Yes, but I like the strategy versus tactical. I hate to describe compliance as a necessary evil because I'm such a compliance person. But it is,
It is.
like you have these list of things, you are required to follow best practice, you're required to follow a framework. So I mean, that's exactly what the framework's purpose is to be that foundation for you. How you build your business on top of it, is really where your risk comes in, right? Like, what's your business risk? You've got this framework, you can pass an audit, great. We have to do that, right? You're held in compliance to a standard. But risk management is a whole different thing, and understanding the risk to the business is not cut and dry. It really is just that. You have to understand the risk to the business. That's where reasonable risk comes in. If
Right.
something is unreasonable, then you're not going to do it, and being able to demonstrate that and have evidence to provide that, or stand up in court if you are breached, right? Like, where are your risks? How did you address them? How did you remediate them? So being able to say that you are compliant, yes, is wonderful. But being able to identify and put really a methodology around what your risks are, what your compensating controls are, how are your protections holding up, and being able to have those conversations and how it feeds into the enterprise's risk management strategy is really a handshake and a whole deeper dive.
Yeah, it was an interesting comment that my marketing manager was at an event and was sitting there, and she was sitting at a table with some ladies, and they were talking about risk management, and we was talking about this, and the lady says, "Well, I don't want to know what my risk is," and she's
Ooh,
like, "Well, why not?" She says, "Well, if I know what my risk is, that makes me more liable for not addressing my risk. So if I don't know about it, I'm less liable." And when my marketing manager told me that,
organizability.
my mind just was like, "What? How?" I was trying to say, how can I get to that reasoning? But that exists out there. It's all what I like to say: put the head in the sand. Well, if I don't know about it, how am I responsible for it? And I think that a lot of it, that's reason I love educating. And having these discussions like this is to get people to understand is you're if you're a fiduciary responsible for a company, you're an employee, you're responsible for doing these tasks. It doesn't matter if you're the janitor to all the way CEO. You are responsible whether you realize it or not. Whether you know there's a risk or not, you're still liable for that risk. So, do you want to know about it? The next side of it? Because I said, well, if I know about it, then I got to fix every one of these risks right now. I'm like, well, we want to get them fixed, but that's not reasonable. We want to plan what we can fix now and then and put a plan to get them fixed. And if I got that, you've done your best efforts to resolve these risks and mitigate those risks. Now you have some protection. From when you hear that, because I saw the look in your face, what I don't know if you hear this too, but we hear this all the time. And coming out of folks is like, if I know about it, then I'm more liable. For those folks that's looking at and how do you educate, you looking at myself and I talk to these folks and I want to educate them. From your perspective, how should we go about putting that into layman terms that help those folks understand that knowing about it and having a plan and fix as you can is tremendously better and gives you the actual protections that you're hoping to have versus the head in the sand approach?
Right. Whenever the word risk registry came onto the scene, I thought it
Yep.
was a gift from the heavens. I'm like,
Right.
oh, we can write these down and like have somebody take a look at them. So I've done my due diligence. I've done my job ethically to raise a hand about a risk and put it into a registry and have a plan. So yes, being able to head on address risks because they're going to be at various levels, and
Yes.
understanding the risk to the business is really going to be key there. I spoke to a group of graduates at one of the local universities here about risk management and cybersecurity, and I was like, don't be scared of it. Do not be scared of risk management. It's designed to have you raise your hand or use your expertise to find weaknesses in a program and then be able to address it, remediate it, and prioritize it. So that was the biggest thing, like understanding the risk to the business and being able to prioritize what matters. I mean, certainly there's going to be low hanging fruit all the time, to be able to remediate, and then just being able to assign some sort of criticality. So we did that in house before we got big enough at the bank to outsource it and have somebody help us define that,
Mhm.
right? But really, the prioritization to me is equally as important as risk management in itself, and the risk registry is being able to prioritize it and have a plan. And honestly, auditors and especially federal regulators really like that, right?
Oh,
Like one of the first conversations that I'd have on day one was, here's our risk registry, here's the remediation, this is what the plan is, we're planning for it, maybe it's budget related, we can't plan for it for another 6 months, this is what we're going to do in the interim, etc. But being able to prioritize those risks and address it head on. And back to your question, are you hearing the same things? Yes, we do. You have more people that are more risk adverse than
yeah.
others, but being able to have that very transparent conversation and what you're going to do about it, is better for the business, and it's better for your examinations.
Yeah. We, the risk registry, the plan for it, and all this, a lot of people will hear me talk about a POAM, plan of action and milestone. And that's exactly what we're doing is we're taking that risk registry. We're going to find out what our deficiencies are. We got that. We put a plan to how they get addressed and the milestones of when they're going to be addressed. Because what you also find in that auditors, when they come in from the previous audit, they go, that's one of the first things they want to look at is where's your POAM and where are you at in it from that plan. And now let's move forward from there. Because if you didn't even address that, then that starts creating an issue there. So that brings in looking at, and this is really what really got me really jazzed up in doing compliance and risk management as an ongoing service that we have in our company. We call it Compliance Ready program. But a couple of my banks, I've been dealing with banks a long time, they would come to me and they say, well, we have these audits, we get ready for them, we do it, and then when it's over, we have our plan, and all the evidence and everything goes away. And then a year later, I got to redo all that. I drop all this. I got to rebuild all that because now it's a point in time thing. And he said, it's just so much work. And then we're getting behind because we can't do this other work and all this. And I actually got tasked by a couple of banks to say, can you come up with a program that would help us to where we wouldn't have this vicious cycle of stuff? Plus, they started seeing that, especially because of all the vendor supply chain issues and stuff like this. Now, every time we are setting up to have a new vendor or we set a new client, we're getting asked, what is our current state of compliance, our current risk posture, all these. Well, that means it needs to be up to date. They're like, well, I don't have the team to go do this. So I started researching and I found that was a very interesting situation. It doesn't matter which framework either. They were
Right.
all the same. It was a point in time thing. So I'm like, okay. So I developed a program and I presented it at a banking event just to see how it'd be receptive. I got 15 minutes into it and they said, you can do that? I'm like, yeah. Okay, let's do it. It's changed now to where we're talking about these things is it's now become this thing is where before it's all reactionary. You're going off doing it, getting ready, you do the audit, and then you do this. It was never considered something I need to be proactive on all the time, even though it really should have been the whole time, but it wasn't. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of folks are now embracing is like, I have a vendor that actually builds ATMs for banks and they were having to meet the same frameworks because that's what was required down the vendor side. And it was being able to put that in place and keep them up to date because now it's almost every month they're getting asked for that. Is this the same thing you've seen as a trend that now it's more proactiveness versus the way it's always had been before reactive?
Well, I mean, and this goes back to my business continuity days, right? Like I would have conversations, what's your DR plan? We've got X, Y, and Z in place, and I'm like, oh, okay, have you tested that? Because if you didn't test it, it doesn't exist.
Right.
And so, right. And so I was, nobody wanted to talk to the business
No.
continuity team until there's
No.
a boom, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's that right of boom versus left of boom, right?
A very good analogy. Very good analogy.
And so what as soon as something goes boom, everybody wants to know what the DR plan is. Um, so absolutely, and I've been a big advocate for that all my entire career. It feels like, is that proactive versus reactive, right? Everybody needs incident response, but it's what you do leading up to that to be proactive that really makes your incident response successful. So absolutely. And we say that in our webinars as well, like, okay, great, control one is establishing an asset inventory, but if the asset inventory is not up to date, then
Right.
you don't have an asset inventory. This has to
Right.
be iterative and proactive continuously. That feeds into so many different things, right? Even just how easy is an asset inventory, one would think, but I mean, then it goes into, you can't protect what you don't know you have. How can
Right.
you patch it? How can you prevent data leak, if you don't,
Mhm.
if it's not up to date. So any of my talks, and you sat through one out in Houston, is that left of boom versus right of boom, right?
Exactly.
Like everything that you do to prepare. And that's going to be your cybersecurity framework. That's going to be your assessments. That's going to be your identification of risks, right? And continuously keeping that proactive state of mind
Right.
is crucial. And I do see a shift of it. I think that we've had so many booms, and now that everything is, on social media, and gosh, I've talked too much this week already. Um, um, Now that everything's on social media, it's no secret when somebody is breached, or
Mhm.
they've leaked a file with PII in it, right? Like it's maintaining that constant state of readiness is absolutely critical. Like it's not a choice; it is crucial.
So what I'm going to close this out with is, we haven't mentioned this two letters in this whole thing. Um, but it's interesting. Some of the stuff that's coming out here is, what are you seeing from a control standpoint, policy standpoint? Because I'm already having to address policies about AI and its role in the actual infrastructures now, both from a cybersecurity standpoint and business process standpoint. What is the next things we should be looking at as far as how controls are going to incorporate that? I know NIST generated a RF1 on just AI. Doing there, I know you guys have been doing some things. Where are you seeing that go, and when are you going to start seeing that more to the mainstream, that auditors are going to start asking those questions and putting those in? Because it's not quite there. It's kind of like on the edge,
Yeah,
but it's coming pretty quick.
right. AI is on the scene, and I think it's here to stay.
Oh yeah.
Um, and so yeah, we get asked about this a lot. So I'll give you my pre-canned answer, and then I'll give you my real answer.
Okay.
Um, so um, from a CIS perspective, there will be no change at this point to the controls themselves around AI. Reason being, you're always going to protect your systems in the same way, right? There's no need for a different safeguard. There's no need for different safeguards for cybersecurity insurance, which is another big topic, right? So AI is no different. We stand very firm on the fact that our safeguards, which are your protections against those things, right, are sound. So there's not going to be any additional at this time, additional controls added. Now, I did ask the team last year the same question, right? What can we tell our end users? And of course, they baked that part in. Pay attention to these controls that they haven't changed. Um, but is it being utilized as an attack vector? Yes.
Of course.
Is training and awareness going to become a whole lot more, even more important than it already is? Absolutely. So we certainly continue to watch threat intel, things like the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report, CrowdStrike's report, IBM has a report for threat intel. So we're certainly watching it. Again, protect your systems in the same way, but be aware, as far as from a threat perspective, but also like internal use as well. That to me goes back to governance, right? Like having a policy
Yes.
around acceptable
Yep.
use and who has access to what data, and prompt engineering, what you are feeding it,
Yep.
right? Because it's intuitive and learning. So certainly, I do think, from a charity Otwell perspective, I do think that at some point CIS is going to have to address it in a deeper way. Um, um, but to any end user, I think that you should be very cautious and certainly understand your data and where it is.
Well, if you think about it from, there's that perspective, but also, when you're having to put your due diligence packages together and you're starting having to bring in these vendors that are using, you're using these cloud-based systems, you're going and getting their trust center, you're pulling that information. What should I be looking for there about them mentioning what they're doing around AI? They have an AI. What LLMs are they using? Is it private internal where it's maybe is it open to where it's learning? There. I mean, what kind of things should we be looking for from that perspective as part of putting a due diligence package together?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider myself in the same boat, right? If I owned a business, I would just want to know, that would be a hot topic as far as understanding exactly what they're using, what they have access to, who
Right.
has access to it, and then really doing my homework on what the implications could be, for different scenarios, and what the risk to the business would be. But it's
You know where my mind goes when it comes about the AI and we're talking about access, where the data is at, and all that. To me, it kind of equates. And I always say, whatever happens in the government finds its way to the commercial market. Always does. But it equates to me about looking at enclaves and CMMC, because it's all about the data flow. Where is the
right.
data at? Who has access to it? When and where? And can I control that? Can I isolate that? Can I validate that? To me, I believe that's where AI in the commercial market is going to drive some of the controls, is looking at it that way, because it is a data governance. It's huge data
Absolutely.
governance, data classification issue. Huge,
Right.
you know. And so if you don't understand where to start there, if you can't do data class and data governance to start with before you do anything else, then you're already on house cards, in my opinion. But
Right.
to me, my outside view looking at controls, it seems to me that would be a way that you would look at it, is the same way that CMMC did around CUI, and how an enclave and access, data locality, data governance, all that would play to me. Does that make sense to you as well?
It does. It's going to force the end user's hand on
Yeah,
data governance.
100%. That's the way I look at it too. Well, this was fun.
Hey, CMMC could be a whole other webinar, right?
Oh,
So
well,
yeah,
I did write a book on that too. So we can have that conversation again too. I got a lot. Matter of fact, I got some friends that like to get on a panel on that. We'll do that next time. But
I
I
have a good
will.
colleague for CMMC. Yeah.
So probably what I will want to do is later this year, maybe we bring another version of this and say, okay, it's after October. It's after the sun setting. Where's the state of things at now? Because things can change so fast and coming into it. And once people have to do it, because lots of people, change.
Proactive
Hey,
versus reactive.
especially in banking,
Okay.
change. They don't want to change. They're very nomadic. They don't want to change until I absolutely have to. So it'd be interesting to do a review of this and see what's going on. If you're game for it,
Yeah,
we'll do
absolutely.
that. Yeah. Well, I've
Absolutely.
enjoyed this, Sherry. It was great to meet you too. I mean,
Oh, same
uh,
here. Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
we'll have another bourbon sometime.
Absolutely. That's the weight of my heart.
Well, to everybody out there, if you want more information about CIS controls, the free CSAT tool, please go to their website. You pull it down. If you need any questions or need help, just reach out to us. We'd be more than happy. Charity, myself, either one, would love to speak with you. And until next time, Charity, have a great one. Thanks, everybody.